This is a Gewaldige Shabbos, Pashas Eikev. This is our first anniversary. 1 year ago on Pashas Eikev, we sent out our first video, and Baruch Hashem, we've had Gewaldige Hatzlacha. As Hashem, we daven that we should have continued Hatzlacha and being Marbet Torah of Rabi Yakov Avi Chatzira. We are learning Sefer Pituchei Chotam, Series 2. Here we go, Pashas Eikev. Okay, there's a lot of Kabbalah in these parashiyos that Rabi Yakov is being meramis to. I think I pointed this out last year. As he gets towards the end of the Dvarim, there's very little like regular stuff or regular, Pashat Ramazim. It's all very based in Kabbalah, so it's more difficult to find things that I can share. But let's try. This week's parasha, Eretz Hashem b'miskenos teichal bolechem. Gavaldik. We have a land of Eretz Yisrael that you can eat bread there, without missing anything. It's not missing anything. Eretz Hashem barzel mareh tachtim nechoshes v'yochalta. You will eat v'savatu uveirachtas Hashem lekecha. You'll bless Hashem your God al artz hatev shenasamach. So the Arizal, Rabi Yakov says the Arizal, and in the Sefer Mishnah's Chasidim as well, talk about in this Parshas Eikev the kavanas one is meant to have while eating. Now, I'm not saying that these are kavanas that we are meant to have. At least I don't have these kavanas when I eat. But learning this, I began to appreciate that there are people that have, when they eat, they're in a different world. Their mamish, their eating is an avodah of being miyachid and kavanas. I have difficulty having kavana when I daven, let alone when I eat. And it was just amazing. So I felt just to see, to learn some of the kavanas, and just to appreciate what goes into it, and then see how Reb Yaakov is meramis some of them into these psukim. We'll give it a try. Here we go. So before we eat, we wash our hands and we make a bracha of al natilas yadayim. The bracha of al natilas yadayim is Rashi Tevis. The first letter of each word is ani, poor. Okay, ani is begematria 130. If you spell out the Shem Havaya b'milui, so b'milui means each letter is spelled out. So Yud would be Yud Vav Daled. And you do that incrementally, which means Yud, Yud Hey, Vav, Yud Hey, Vav Hey. That Shem, B'milui Aleph, equals 130, the gematria of Ani. What's the significance of that? The significance of that is that there are worlds, starting with Atzilus, and then Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. And there's like a chain. The worlds come down as a chain. So the top, so to speak, of the world of Asiya gets from the bottom of the world of Yitzira. So the Shem spelled out in this way is called the Achirayim of Yitzira. Like it's the back of the Yitzira. And that's where the Hashba for Malchus comes from. Malchus is another name for Ani. The Elm of Asiya is the Elm of Malchus. So there's a connection here between the world of Yitzira and Asiya, which the Rabi Yakov says is that eating takes place in these two olamas, Yitzira and Asiya. Okay, so there's already, when we're washing our hands, preparing to eat, there's already a connection into these ideas. Number one. Number two, we make a bracha of hamaitzi. Hamaitzi lechem. And now it's like a machlokes in the Gemara. We say maitzi or hamaitzi. We say hamaitzi. The hey, there's an emphasis made on the hamaitzi. The hey is a reference to the hey ilah and the hey tata. The shem yudke vavke has two heys in it. A hey ilah, the upper hey, and the hey tata, the lower hey. The hey of hamaitzi is a reference to those two heys in the shem havaya. The Hey Shel Bina, that's the first day, and the Hey Shel Machas, which is the second. The word Lechem has a gematria 78, which is the same as the Shem Havaya, which is 26, 3 times. The Shem Havaya times 3 is 78. And the word melech, salt, which is the same letters as lechem, is also times 3 is going to be 78. And that's why we are specific to dip our bread into salt. The Shem Havaya needs to be sweetened, there needs to be a tikka, and there needs to be melech represents the attribute of justice, and we want to be metakin and mamtik that with the lechem. So there's a combo of the lechem with the melech. Terrific. Now, we have a jaw. There's an upper jaw and a lower jaw. The upper jaw has shaykhis to the olam of the sphere called chachma, and the lower jaw has a shaykhis to the sphere of bina sheba chachma. Now, the pasuk says bereishis bar lekim, which means beis reishis. There are 2 beginnings, and those 2 beginnings are chachma and bina. So if there's a beis reishis, there are 2. That means each one is an aleph. So there's an aleph that relates to chachma, and there's an aleph that relates to bina. The letter aleph can be made 2 ways. As a yud, vav, yud. If you take a look at the aleph, so you have a yud on top, a yud on bottom, and a vav in the middle. That equals 26. And you have another way of spelling it, or writing the letter aleph would be with a yud, a vav, and a dalid, which is the gematria of 20. So we have 20 and 26 in your jaw, the upper and lower, as you're putting food in there and chewing. So you're being machav to these 2 alephs of chachma and bina. When they combine, you get 46. 46 is the milui of the Shem Havaya when spelled with yuds. We mentioned that there are 4 ways to spell out the Shem Havaya, and each one corresponds to a different olam. So in Chachma is the Shem Ayin Beis. If you take the milui of the Shem Ayin Beis, that means you're taking Yud Kei Vav Kei, you spell that out. If you add all of that up, you would get 72. If you subtract the Yud Kei Vav Kei and you just want the milui, just what the word is filled in with, you're left with 46. And 46 again is the 2 alephs of the upper jaw and the lower jaw. The shinaim, a person has 32 teeth, and that corresponds to the leiv nesiva is chachma, the 32 paths of chachma, being that the jaw is represented by chachma, so there are going to be 32 teeth, which correspond to the 32 nesivas of chachma. All right, these are some of the kavanas you can have while you're eating. Now, the pasuk tells us, Eretz asher lo b'miskenos teichel bo lachem. So the first remez we saw was that we have to start with Netilas Yadayim. Eretz, the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that Eretz is a reference to the guf, to the body. The human body is referenced to as the guf. So Eretz means when we're involved in guf, when we're involved with mili de guf, which means we're coming to eat. So the first thing is you want to make sure it's leib miskinus. You're not cheap. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us that for 3 things bring poverty, and one of them is someone who is mezalzel ben netilas yadayim. He's not careful with netilas yadayim. And what does that mean? The Gemara says, well, that's only if you didn't wash at all. But if you washed, but you were skimpy with the amount of water you used, that's not so bad. And Rav Chizah says, lav milsa, that's not true. Ana mashay malay chafni maya. I used a lot of water to wash my hands, and I got a lot of goodness. So it goes both ways in Netilas Yadayim. If you're not careful with Netilas Yadayim, then it brings anius. If you are careful with Netilas Yadayim and use lots of water, then it brings goodness. So when you're coming to wash, don't do it b'miskinus. Don't be cheap. Fakert. You don't want anias. You want ashiris. Remember, al netilas yadayim is the Rashi Tevis ani. That means if you're not going to do netilas yadayim properly, it brings anias. B'miskenus, the word miskenus is gematria 570, which is the gematria of netilas yadayim. So you don't want to do live miskenus. Don't do it cheap. Don't be a misken. Do it biravchus. If you do it beravchus, then you're zeicha to ashirus. But miskenos male with a vav is the gematria 580, adding 2 for, I guess, the Netilas Yadayim. B'miskenos male is 580, the same as the word ashir. So if you do male, you fill it up, you fill up your cup, and you're careful in Netilas Yadayim, then you're zeicha to ashirus. Move on. Teichal bo lechem. So lechem is what we already mentioned before. When you're coming to eat bread, that's always achila is focus in the Torah is coming to eat bread, and that's the lechem and the melech, which we discussed the Shem Havaya of 26 times 3. You want to make sure you're not missing any kavanas, says Rabi Yakov, when you're coming to eat. You want to have all of these kavanas, and when you do, then that brings about an amazing tikkun. It brings about an tikkun because every piece of food has nitzitzis of kedusha in it. And we want to bring out those nitzitzis. And how do we do that? We do that by being mechavin, by having kavana when we eat. The pasuk says, "Va'achalta v'savata uveirachta es Hashem Elokecha al ha'aretz hateva." When you eat and you're satisfied and you bench and you make a bracha. So Rabbi Yakov says this is a reference to the bracha of hamaitzi, and you want to make sure you have the kavanas of the 2 heys, the hey ilah and the hey tata. Elokecha is the same letters of achila. So when you are eating, remember that you remember to have kavanah while you eat. And atayva is a reference to the 2 heys, the hey ilah and the hey tata, that you're mechavan with hamaitzi. That says Rabbi Yakov, amazing. The next verse is saying, it says, Penteichal v'savata. But lest you eat and be satisfied, and you beg, you have gewaldige homes, and you have lots of gold and silver. And you'll get haughty and you'll forget HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 1 second, says Rabi Yakov. Before the pasuk says that Teichal, that v'achalta v'savata uveirachta es Hashem Elokecha. So ma karapo, says Rabi Yakov, that's where it begins. When you eat and you're satisfied and you forget to bench. You don't think HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're not mechaven when you're eating. Your eating is like everything else you do. It's even if you're making brachas, but it's not the kavana, then v'shachachta es Hashem Elokecha, you forget HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So let's do the opposite. Let's be mechazek, at least when we eat, to eat like a mensch. To focus, if we could do a little bit better and focus on the shame, what we say when we say Hashem's name, and if we could do more, we could wash with beravchas, and we could do more, we could be machavan that, well, you know what? When I'm eating, I'm doing something holy. This isn't mundane. Mert Hashem will have a different experience in our achila. Have a wonderful Shabbos.